You've heard AM, you've heard FM. Now, tune into DM Radio, the world's longest running show about data. Each week, host Eric Kavanaugh interviews the brightest minds in the world of information management. Want to be on the show? Send an email to info@dmradio.biz. Now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here. Excited for another deep dive into the world of data and technology. And of course, we're going to talk about the hottest topic. Who isn't talking about AI, artificial intelligence, or as a friend of mine calls it in his environment, authentic intelligence. We could talk about that on another show sometime. But AI is everywhere. We can thank the folks at OpenAI for letting the chat out of the bag, as I like to say. ChatGPT got out there and really blew a lot of minds. I mean, it blew my mind just yesterday playing around with it, how much stuff it has absorbed. Yes, there are hallucinations. My good buddy Eugene Burke from Digital Strategies Group, a partner of mine, he had a great line. He said these LLMs have an epistemological barrier because they don't know what they don't know, and that's when they make stuff up. So you got to watch out for that. That's why you have an embedding strategy, for example. That's why you have vector databases. That's why you fine tune, for example, or use the RAG model that came out of Facebook. There are a lot of things you can do. But the bottom line is that AI is everywhere now. And in my opinion, it is going to subsume a whole swath of traditional enterprise technologies, stuff like customer service, or at least online chatbots. Chatbots are going to be 1,000 times better thanks to generative AI. I mean, 1,000 times better. They kind of rolled out, usually this technology rolls out a bit too soon because people are champing at the bit to get it out there. And chatbots came out a bit too early and they kind of ticked people off and they didn't do a very good job. So now they have a bit of a bad rap. But with the power of Gen AI and a good embedding strategy and a good trustworthy curated data source or sources for your AI model, good things are going to happen. But we'll talk to a couple experts today to find out. My good buddy, Dr. Eric Siegel from Machine Learning Week, used to be a different conference. He's got other conference too. In June in Phoenix will be the next one. He's here with us today. And Paul Marca is here. He's from Ikigai, and he's also an expert in educational material for industry, which I love because I'm a trade press guy. I love trade press. Trade press is serious material. You can't have just light, fluffy stuff. If you're talking to serious executives in a trade, you have to know the details. You have to understand where are the rough edges, where are the really good sources of information, and what do people need to know to do their jobs better. With that, let's bring in Eric Siegel. So, Eric, we've talked on many times about this show about analytics, predictive analytics. Now, this AI stuff, it's another way, it's another tool to get to something interesting, and it's predictive, right? It predicts text based upon your prompt and what it's been trained on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the predictive analytics is a synonym for machine learning, and generative AI, ChatGPT, and these large language models, they use machine learning just the same, but they're applying it in a different way. It's to write the next word rather than predict whether the customer is going to click, buy, lie, or die, cancel their subscription, turn out to be a bad debtor. So it's a different application of the same core technology. And it sort of provides a whole new set of capabilities, right? Because it's generating new content. However, I'm here to say, let's not forget about the predictive applications of machine learning. You could call it predictive AI, predictive analytics, whatever you want to call it, targeting, marketing, fraud detection, financial credit risk management, all the large scale operations stand to be improved with prediction. And so when you want to improve existing large scale operations, that's the arena. It's older, but it's not old school. It's still largely untapped. There's still a lot more money generated by it and thrown into it. So let's not forget about predictive AI in addition to generative AI.
That's a really good point, because I think sometimes we tend to get swept up into fads, and this is a new fad. It's more than a fad. I mean, this is a movement for sure. But you're right that there are lots of other applications out there that are doing predictions that are not Gen AI in nature and are doing a pretty good job of predicting. Machine learning at scale is so powerful now because we have the compute power and we have the expertise and we have the tools, the technologies, we have a lot of data. So that whole space has really matured in the last, like, say, 5 to 7 years. And I think that's good news for everyone. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was in natural language processing research in the 90s for 6 years, and I never thought I'd see the capabilities that we see now with large language models. It's uncanny, it's incredible, it's amazing. Never thought I'd see it in my lifetime. But I also think that it very quickly lends itself to problematic, costly hype, in the sense that it's easy to believe the thing, because it's so seemingly human-like,
Hmm,
is actually approaching general human level capabilities.
that's interesting. So in other words, you're saying we have to be careful what we expect from this stuff, because even though it's very good at mimicking a human being in communication abilities, it's not that good in terms of being able to really understand problems. And that's one thing that a guest on our show said recently. These engines are reflecting all that has been said and all that has been known, well, at least to a certain extent. That doesn't necessarily mean they're good at coming up with new solutions to problems. They're just good at reflecting back what has already been stated somewhere else, right?
Yeah, the astounding capability we see, and anyone out there who's not actually played with one of these language models like ChatGPT absolutely should. There's no reason not to try it out. It is uncanny. But what we're talking about is sort of low-level adeptness with language. Literally on the per word basis is how it actually operates under the hood. And in that sense, the core technology itself, these large language models, what they can do is produce seemingly human-like writing, but they're not designed to meet higher order human goals like being correct or knowing the right answer most of the time. Now, it can do that to a certain degree because there's sort of patchwork built on top of it, to a certain degree, but getting it to really perform on the full scale of human level capabilities across levels, not just the per sentence and sort of the flow of the narrative, but the meaning, the correctness of it. That's still an outstanding research effort. And if you're trying to create an artificial human, I'll just say you have your work cut out for you.
And that is very true. And we are on a very interesting journey, I guess is one way I'd put it. And I'll throw this last comment over to you, and then we'll bring in Paul here in a second. But one of the more clever things I've heard about these LLMs with respect, especially to the truth or ground truth, is that my buddy Alex Husky said we cannot allow these LLMs to pattern recognize their way to the truth. Right? And I'm like,
Okay.
that's exactly what they're doing. They're pattern recognizing their way to what they say, which is
Well,
presumed to be true, but it's
you
not
know,
the truth.
I don't know if that's necessarily a counter argument to whether they could be human-like, because pattern recognition, that's a vague term, and sort of you could say that's all people do. But think of it this way. The only thing that's being used to train them for the most part of their operation is existing, basically a huge amount of the copy that could be skimmed off the internet. Um,
Right.
to what degree can we successfully reverse engineer the amazing capabilities of the human mind only based on that one particular human behavior of writing? There's going to be a ceiling on how far that can get.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, let's bring in Paul Marca from Ikigai. Also, you spent 32 years at Stanford, I think you said, building out education programs for industry, and now you're doing the same thing, focused on AI. Tell us about AI. Tell us about yourself and what you see in the near offing, if you will, for the impact of AI.
Yeah, Eric, thanks and great to be here. I guess Eric squared. We've got a wonderful conversation, so
There you
thank you
go.
both. I spent 32 years at Stanford, predominantly building education programs for industry. And the focus there was really in the School of Engineering, delivering education to those people at Google, at Microsoft, at Intel, who were interested in building the latest and greatest chips, the best software in the world, and so on. So I had a delightful run at Stanford University in the Stanford Center for Professional Development. And as it relates to AI, working with great faculty like Fei Li, Andrew Ng, Chris Manning, and others who really were pioneers in this space. Today at Ikigai, we have a wonderful company creating an AI platform based on large graphical models, numbers, basically, and thinking through how we can leverage three tools. AI match, how can you match and clean up your Excel data? It's really Gen AI for tabular data.
Hmm.
So match, if you can fill in the empty holes in your data sheet, your Excel sheet, then you can certainly then start to forecast and plan. You can fill missing holes in future data sets. The beautiful thing about this tool is it's a no-code tool, which really stitches together various data sets, external and internal, using your own data. You can predict the future. That's sort of the very quick idea. As far as education is concerned, I'm focused on building education for executives. Why should you use these tools? For builders on the platform, how can you use them effectively? And then also, we're going to be focusing on building a foundations layer. What's under the hood? How does the algorithm work in our case, and why is it so powerful? So I'll stop there and let you pepper away with questions.
Yeah, so you'd mentioned something in the pre-call about some of the classes that you're doing now and some of the research you're doing, and you've said something kind of interesting that there's a lot of sitting on the sidelines. There are a lot of executives who I think are rightfully wondering, what do we do here? How do we leverage this stuff? How do we train our employees? How do we upskill? Is it ethical to use this stuff? What are the concerns? There are all these questions, and I had this interesting observation last night. In a lot of companies, you kind of know how many people are going to come in. You know your business. In some companies, you don't know how much business you're going to get, and so being able to dynamically adjust capacity is a real challenge because maybe you go out and you sell something and you realize the guy you were selling is fully booked. They're like, oh no, he's booked. That's the guy I was going to give to this client. And AI, I think, is going to come in here and kind of help out with some things, with some of the traditional tasks, if nothing else, just to kickstart processes. So for like copywriting, it's good to kind of kickstart and just see what it gets. And you know what else these things are very good at, I've learned, is explaining understood technologies like routers or internet browsers or things of this nature, where there's a lot of published material to draw from. So they're very good at that. So there's a bit of an abstract question here, but I guess I'm throwing over to you some advice on how do you get people off the dime to realize you have to start using it to just start somewhere.
I mean, I think it's a little bit about a change activity. For executives, they've done things a certain way. They're sitting on a bunch of data in the case of Ikigai. How might we help them think about leveraging that data in a safe and sane environment? Executives typically last 3 years in terms of their tenure. And so creating a big risk, I want to create a data lake and mine all my data, that may be too big a step. So one of the things we're doing is we're creating executive seminars. And interestingly, we have a design thinking exercise, flipping the traditional panel discussion. And we start with, what do you predict as the potential of AI? And people go through that, and there's wonderful suggestions, fairly broad based brainstorming activity. And then we say, okay, so what is the reality of AI? And there's an enormous gap. And part of the opportunity, I think, here, as you rightly said, Eric, is, how can we leverage these tools so that the mundane could get completed, so that actually we can become more human, get rid of the task that I would have to otherwise normally spend time on. A data scientist, when they're doing an M&A work, it takes them potentially 3 weeks to pull together a bunch of spreadsheets to evaluate a deal. What if we could get that done in 3 days? That's, I think, the potential. And then what else can happen around thinking and re-envisioning the jobs of the future that don't have to have this rote function as a component of the labor that is now currently being done.
Yeah, and it's funny, what you just articulated the other day for kicks. I went and logged into Bard and I wrote, Dear Bard, please write an article describing your ideal operating system and explain why LLMs might well absorb the enterprise analytics space. Thanks. And it did. And here's what it wrote: the Dreamweaver OS, weaving together efficiency and understanding with LLMs. And this is Bard. Bard writes, imagine an operating system that seamlessly integrates the raw power of large language models into our daily workflows. An OS that anticipates your needs, translates languages on the fly, extracts insights from mountains of data with human-like comprehension, and automates repetitive tasks, all while learning from your every reaction. This is the vision I have for the Dreamweaver OS. Like, what? That's perfect. That's exactly what you're talking about, because now automation is hard. Anyone who's ever done automation knows that automation is very hard. You always think you can automate things more easily than you really can because there are so many edge cases, right? I mean, I'm one of these people when Google predicts the next sentence for me, I'm like, no, thank you. I'm going to do it this way, right? And I do worry a little bit that it's going to kind of homogenize communication and sort of dull people down and dumb people down a little bit to be less interesting or less creative, I suppose. But nonetheless, that's exactly what you were just talking about, is automating repetitive tasks.
Yeah.
And that's a huge deal because guess what? Repetitive tasks are boring, right?
Automating those tasks so you can become more creative, maybe even more human. And that's the irony here.
More human than human.
I'm all
Right.
for I'm all for automation. I've been in computers since I was a kid, and that computers are nothing if not automation machines.
Right.
But I'm going to push back a little on against Bard, not against you, right? You're just the messenger. But I think that the Dreamweaver OS scenario that Bard just described shows that Bard is quite capable of adeptly simulating the kind of hype that humans generate. It's weaving this expectation of autonomy that I think is unrealistic, because that, and it's a little subjective, right? It's sort of like, hey, it's going to do all this thing. It's going to watch your every move and be proactive and do things that you can trust without supervision and take over and make everything easier for you. There's a real limit to the degree to which we can allow systems, or that we can expect that they'll be capable enough to run autonomously. And I think that that's a really important thing, not to that we manage expectations properly. That is, that we don't succumb to hype. I think there is real value, and I think we could you can philosophize about what's hype and what does the word intelligence mean till the cows come home. But it's really simple. The antidote to hype is simply focus on a specific, concrete value proposition.
Right.
How exactly are you using this? What repeated writing task? You have to write 100 letters a day to irate customers, whatever it is. What specific operation is going to actually be supported in what way, whether it's by generative or predictive? In the case of predictive, what are you predicting and to what end? What operation in marketing, fraud detection, et cetera, is precisely going to be improved, in exactly what way, by way of predictions of what, or what, who's going to click, buy, lie, or die? What exactly is the outcome or behavior you're predicting? Either whether it's generative or predictive, we need to be focusing a lot more on measured, proven enterprise value. And I think that's a really big missing part, not only of the conversation in general, but of the actual execution within enterprises.
Yeah, and we'll be right back after this break. Don't touch that dial.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking with a couple AI experts. We've got Dr. Eric Siegel and Paul Marca talking about what AI is, what it means, what it's going to do for us. And Paul, I'll throw it over to you first to talk about education. And, I heard a great line from Matt McClarty. He's the CTO of Boomi. He was on a show a few months ago. And I asked him for his advice on, what we really should focus on in this era of AI and machine learning. And he said, learning. And his point was that we all need to learn more about how this stuff works and what it does. And you have to play around with it. It's almost like learning to ski or something. I mean, you can't fall over. It can be very exciting. Then you can hurt yourself. You can't really hurt yourself unless you go out and do foolish things with it. But the point is, you have to play around with these things to kind of understand what they do and how they operate. But how do you impart on people the importance of educating themselves and educating their teams about what's possible here and what's practical?
Yeah, I think so. So as we think about applying Ikigai to enterprises, one of the challenges we face are executives. Why should they make a move when they might get fired in a couple, 3 years? And this is a big risk to some extent, pulling data out of your system and thinking about how to make it work. So educating executives on the why, working with those data scientists and those in charge of processing the data and making it available around the how. How can you use this? What are the experiments and what are the use cases that might be interesting? So that's where we're focused in building education. But I can't help but tell the story about my son. My son was a sophomore in college, was sort of interested. Hey, Dad, I need to do a resume for my internship this summer. And I said to him, why don't you just pop your sort of parameters into ChatGPT and see what it spits out? And he sort of looked at me aghast, like, is that cheating? And I said to him, look, it's a tool. And if you don't use this tool, then you're behind everybody else who is using it. And so get experience with it, start to get into the sort of rhythm of using this like a hammer. It's a tool in your toolkit, and make sure you're sort of getting practice with it, to your point earlier around utilization, and also trial new things. One of the things I did, he's a surfer. So I said, write a particular sort of, itinerary for a trip that we were taking in a surfer mode, just to have some fun with it. And it came out with a dude, it'll be awesome at the end of the narrative. You just got to have a little bit of fun with these tools and think about sort of opportunities to use and leverage in practice.
Yeah, and I had an idea since we're talking about kids. I'll throw this over to you, Eric Siegel. Kids, those who have kids know, and there's even a commercial I've seen on TV now which pokes fun at this. You got to be careful what you say around your kids, because they will then parrot it back at the inappropriate time. Like if you say your neighbor's a jerk or, talks too much or something, and they'll be like, Daddy says you talk too much. Like, what? Shh, don't do that. I kind of feel like that's going to happen with this stuff, because you don't know what it's all been trained on. So you don't know what is in this corpus of knowledge or information that these large language models have. And that is a concern for large enterprises, because if you don't carefully choose which data to train your model on, you're going to train it on data that you probably shouldn't train your model on. You're going to get weird answers because that stuff is out there somewhere. It's all in all these databases. And what's cool to me about these large language models is how the engines actually pull together the information, right? You compare it to a database query like a SQL query or something. This is a very different thing. SQL query is a little bit more specific about this data, that data, this set, this value that I want back. Or here you're giving it a prompt, and it just goes and finds all kind of stuff from all over the place, from the darkest recesses of its brain, and pulls it all together for you in prose. That's going to be a pretty interesting dynamic. What do you think, Aaron?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's sort of the big difference between generative and predictive AI, which is that predictive, typically your model is fully homegrown and doesn't have to be nearly as complex. I mean, there's a ceiling. You can't predict like a magic crystal ball anyway, but you can predict it a lot better than guessing. Whereas the uncanny, incredible ability of large language models requires really sophisticated models and a lot of data, but you don't have control. But even if you did, there's still this sort of wild card aspect of these models. You don't know what it's going to do, and you don't know exactly how valuable or helpful it's going to be. It's gotten, using it is experimental. It's got an ad hoc nature to it in all cases. You got to try it out. I'm writing these kinds of letters to these kinds of customers and under these circumstances. Try it out. It's going to depend on which model, which language model solution you use. Try it out, see how valuable it is. Ultimately, try to quantify how much it's helping with the enterprise project. Whereas with predictive, right, it's not a matter of executives ramping up by putting their hands on it, but it's about conceptual learning. So in that case, you need to learn what's predicted, how well, and what's done about it. You predict, is this transaction likely fraudulent? Then we're going to either hold or block it. And we're going to have this type of metric that says how well we're predicting it and how much value, how much cost savings in the case of fraud detection we get. If this customer is likely to cancel, send them a retention discount meant to keep them around. So you need to define the project, get into that level of specifics, and the non-data scientists, the stakeholders, and even executives need to get involved on a certain semi-technical level of understanding around those three things: what's predicted, how well, and what's done about it.
And if
Yeah.
I could just jump in here, this notion that we are espousing at Ikigai is expert in the loop. And if you're expert in the loop, then you have to at least be conversant in what's happening in terms of the technology application. And also, if you're the data scientist who's helping guide and shape those predictive models for the analysis that you have inside a company with homegrown data, then you really do need to be expert about what's happening underneath the hood. So you need to have a level of depth. So that's why education, I believe, is so critical to educate the expert, whether you're executive or data scientists or others who will be impacted by this new and emerging technology.
Yeah. I mean, it's a moving target. And Eric, you've got a new book coming out. I think it's called the AI Playbook. And that's going to be fun to check out when it's hot off the presses here. But I'll give you my vision of where this is going, and let's see what you think, and then maybe Paul chime in as well. To me, the what's going to happen here is most major corporations, most serious forward-looking organizations are going to realize, hey, we need one of these things. We need one of these models. They're going to want their own private model. They're not going to want to just be, hitting some public model. Some will, some won't care too much, but serious, especially for IP, intellectual property, PII, all these sensitive things, you're going to want your own model, and you're going to carefully curate what data goes in there, but you really want to tap into all your major systems like your ERP, your data warehouse, your web analytics, all these different things. And then the executives who have access to everything can sit there and ask any question at all. And the interface becomes this LLM. And you're like, what strategies can I use to improve sales in my Northeast region? Enter. And all this amazing stuff comes back. And to me, I mean, it's gonna be very interesting to see how it pans out. But what an amazing resource to suddenly have not just a search, because let me tell you, search like on websites, search stinks. I think the chatbot evolution or revolution came because search was just doing such a poor job. Not Google search. I mean, Google, of course, has a whole line of business around that, but the search on individual websites has always been really, really bad. Like if you ever tried it, you just don't get good answers from it because it's not indexed properly and no one really cares and they just forgot about it. And that's why even they can kind of hide it sometimes. You can't even find the search. But if you now have this prosaically enabled engine that can reach into any system and collect data from anywhere, that's crazy. It's like the computer system in Star Trek. But first, Eric, comment on it, and then Paul.
Well, I just have to be a naysayer. Like, I just think that that's a narrative I've been hearing a lot, and
Oh, sorry about that. Go ahead.
so no problem. That's a narrative I hear a lot, and the idea again, it goes back to just you have to ask how autonomous is the system, and that is to say, to what degree is Paul's expert in the loop, a human, not going to be needed? Can an executive ask questions like that and expect that the system has looked at the let's say tabular data files about how the business has been conducted and making a sound, meaningful recommendation about business tactics or business strategy? And right now, no. And the sense that it's headed in that direction, I think, is a very questionable one. I think that that's where there's an overpromise. I think that that's where we see this seemingly human-like behavior, which is so impressive, but it's hard to hold that impressiveness in your head and at the same time recognize the limitation, which is that there's a whole nother breadth of capabilities that humans have, that the system itself is not going to magically emerge, and we don't really have evidence that it's definitively headed in that direction.
Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, so I have to agree. So there's a professor, Michael Kosinski, at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, who likened ChatGPT to the human brain and its evolution. So he mapped it at today, according to him, the ChatGPT is like the zebrafish, which fires out about 10 million neurons. The human brain has about 85 billion neurons. So we're a few factors away from actually using these tools today to achieve what is known in the industry as artificial general intelligence, AGI. I think though that regardless of where we are, we want to make sure, at least as we believe, as I build education programs, it's making the assumption that education that there is an expert in the loop in terms of the process, that we involve humans, that they play a significant role in determining outcomes based on recommendation engines that spit out particular predictions. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I hear where you guys are going, and I guess the caveat I'd throw out there is in this vision I'm articulating, the system is just giving ideas. You're not actually letting it run the company or run different branches of the company. What you're doing as an executive is just asking questions such that when that person comes in for their weekly meeting, you can throw these different things at them. What about this? What about that? Because a lot of times I mean, what I've learned with these things is it'll bring up stuff that I did not think of. And I've seen that in general with AI, wherever it kind of lurks out there, you'll just see these just interesting little anomalies like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. And it's like a really good point. I mean, I had it write a business plan for something I call a place to play, which is this idea I had almost like Chuck E. Cheese for adults is kind of the idea where it's a bunch of venues that are community owned. So there's more control in the local community for the bands that come through town and all this kind of stuff because I want to see more live music, basically for selfish reasons. And I did not give it any information in the prompt about this, but it figured out a couple interesting things. One of which was that most music venues are owned by corporations, and the decisions are outside of those venues or outside of those regions as to who comes to town. And I'm like, wow, that was in my head, but I didn't put it in the prompt. And he came up with this all by itself. That's pretty interesting. So, I mean, one thing I would love to do, and maybe Eric, I'll throw it over to you and see if you know anything, is you kind of better understand there are layers in these, just like deep learning modules, right? Have all these different layers. Some are hidden layers, some are transparent, et cetera. There are decisioning layers inside of here. And I think what's going to happen, and is probably happening now, is that advances are being made in certain layers that are going to improve accuracy, that are going to improve different aspects of it. But do you know much about how that stuff works, Eric, or tell us what you know?
Well, I agree that the thing could certainly come up with ideas that you wouldn't have thought on, potentially didn't think of yourself. You call it brainstorming, right? Idea conception. Uh, again, it's sort of an ad hoc use, and it just depends on the day of the week, the particular topic area, the way you phrase the question, which language model you're using, the context of what could or would be valuable. But you're, in that case, very much the human in the loop. So if you're not just sort of saying, if the system is not posing as, hey, I looked at all your files and this is clearly a trend and this is the way things should go, then you're assuming too much about its potential correctness. But when you're the human in the loop and you can say, hey, well, that abstractly, I never thought of that general idea or direction or line of thinking. And you already know, just the same as if you'd been talking to a human, that it sounds like a potentially good idea. There's no question that's valuable. It's hard to measure what the value is or how often it would be valuable. And I'll be interested in studies, but that's all still very, very early. It's ad hoc because it's not a human, and it's very, very limited ultimately in its capabilities, even if it sounds quite human-like a lot of the time. The internal workings of it, I mean, in general, there's sort of two main, I wouldn't say layer, not to confuse terms, but sort of two main iterations. One is a foundation model, that's just the core language model, which it's in and of itself is just predicting, it's autocomplete on steroids, as people say. So it's on that word to word level, and that it does that so well, it turns out that it somehow seems to be dealing to some degree with concepts that we understand around language and words, so that it puts things together that kind of sound like they make sense and is often correct. I'm not astounded when the thing makes stuff up and is wrong. I'm astounded when it's correct. And it does it so well that sometimes, it often turns out to be correct. And that's quite amazing. And then the next phase, the sort of level on top of that, is to try to get it to be more correct and to be inoffensive and things like that. And that's where you've got a whole new level of supervision where you've got human feedback. But that's very expensive. It doesn't scale. It's not trained. The first part is just based on this existing data that we have so much copy, so much text from the internet. Now, this next part, we have to have humans spending a lot of time giving feedback on it, and then that's integrated. That's a research area. It can tame the system so that it's less likely to tell you how to build a bomb or to say something racist, but it's not foolproof, and it's still just a very partial incremental step towards higher order human goals.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Well, folks, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You're listening to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Stand by.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio with Eric Siegel and Paul Marca. We're talking all about artificial intelligence, AI, it's everywhere. And my good buddy Usama Fayyad, we had him on last week, and Eric knows him. He's spoken at a couple of his conferences over the years. He said something, it's pretty funny. He goes, first of all, these really large language models, no one knows how they work. All right. It's a bit of a mystery. It's not really supposed to work because they're too big, but somehow they do. But he said that doesn't mean bigger is necessarily better. And everyone keeps thinking, oh, bigger models, more, trillions, et cetera, billions and trillions, et cetera, of facets. And he's like, no, no, no. You want it as small as possible. And that the concept is narrow AI. And I've heard that concept now for like the last 4 years, 5 years. And what it means is very focused. You focus on one specific thing that you're trying to do. That's exactly what you were talking about a minute ago, right, Eric? Is what is the benefit I want from this? What do I want to automate? How do I want to automate it? What do I want to be the end result of all this? And if you take that perspective, that's when you're going to succeed with AI. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, narrow AI is the only AI. You put the word
That's a
narrow
great
in
quote.
there, you put the word narrow in there only because you're differentiating from AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is a myth, fairy tale, and dystopian fantasy that will never happen. Okay, I'm not saying that it'll never happen, but I am saying that we have not taken any concrete steps. Philosophizing about AGI is, in my opinion, no different than it was in the 50s when Alan Turing first proposed the thought experiment of the Turing test and what would it mean for a computer to be, quote, intelligent. The problem is that we call it AI. The problem is with the word intelligence, which is amorphous at best. It's a word about people. The concept of AI is great in philosophy and science fiction. I'm a huge fan for real. But when we apply it to machines, it's almost impossible to get away with poor expectation management, otherwise known as hype. I love concrete value propositions. Help it write first drafts, help it predict to target your largest scale operational decisions. These are real game-changing value propositions that are concrete and nonfiction.
I agree. And I'll throw it over to Paul. What do you think?
Yeah, so I'm advising a company called Beyond Imagination. They're focused on the narrow AI, this notion that, for example, in the US, we have a shortage of nurses. What if we could sort of map the nurse's brain and activity to support inline activity in the surgical theater? The idea there is that there are specific tasks and functions. The robot could adapt, in theory, to the doctor, providing unique service. And by the way, 24/7, 365 activity. Now, what are the implications there? The implications are, first of all, solving for a crisis, a nursing crisis that we have in this country and potentially other places. But you can imagine also scaling that to particular areas where there is need. So I think this notion of narrowly focusing our artificial intelligence with the qualified intelligence there, I love that, is really important to create use cases that might be relevant now and in the future, and to learn from those across developed and developing countries.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Eric, I'll throw it back over to you. I'm a big fan of cliches, which my British business partner once encapsulated by saying, the wisdom they couldn't kill, which I thought was pretty powerful, right? Because historically, there have been people in power who did not want the people out of power to be too smart, for very selfish reasons. But there's an old expression that says, man doesn't need to be taught so much as reminded. And I've always loved that one because you learn so much over the course of your life, but then someone just have to tap you on the shoulder and going, hey, remember this? You thought about this before. And that's where I see AI really providing a lot of value is in just suggestions, right? Instead of turning it on to be fully automated where it runs your company, you got to be careful about that. But it will make very good suggestions at any number of control points, right? In the risk management where we talk about control points, which is some point at which a human being or a machine or an algorithm can make a decision, can change something, a trajectory like approving a loan or a transaction or whatever. And at any of those control points, that's where you want the suggestions coming in, just on the side of the screen somewhere, or just a little, hey, maybe do this, do that. I think that's where most of the value of AI is going to be manifest. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that that's probably maybe more than half, even if predictive, definitely all of generative. It's got to have human in the loop. So it's making a suggestion. I totally agree. But there's a good portion of predictive where it does become fully autonomous. That's where there's leniency to error. Humans are making errors anyway. The computer is going to make less errors, and it's going to automatically decide on the fly, should I authorize this credit card charge based on whether the predicted probability that it was a fraudulent charge, and which of these million people should I market to? Which ad should I display? There's so many places where it actually is fully autonomous. In fact, I like this quote, man doesn't need to be taught so much as reminded. It made me think not of what AI is doing, but how people think about AI. I feel like, I don't like being bad cop, man. Like I'm always like, come on, you're hyping it too much. And I'm that guy in the room all the time. And generally people, when I say it, they're like, yeah, okay, you're right. And it's like, everyone sort of knows it's not going to suddenly become a human tomorrow. Once you sort of, and if you kind of put it in front of them, then they're like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I got to get control of my hype meter. So I feel like that's started becoming my job.
Yeah. Paul, what do you think? Are you
I love the hype. I mean, I think the thing is, again, going back to the exercise with our executives, what is the potential of AI? People get really excited. And then what is the reality? And I think part of these conversations, and thank you, Eric, for hosting this, is how do we bridge that gap? Where are the opportunities? Recognizing that the AI is still now a zebrafish and the 10 million neurons, and we're firing on 85 billion neurons. So there's a gap there, and there should be a gap. Where can we be successful? Where can we be successful in leveraging what's happening today, learn and inform the future state? I think that's why I'm so passionate about education around AI as being so important. And again, this notion of expert, or as Eric says, human in the loop, you've got to maintain that, even where you can, in some sense, with predictive, and our Ikigai, we're doing a lot of work. In fact, we have a use case with a digital bank looking at fraud prevention and so on, and improving those models and getting better results than sort of the standard approach, but including that human or expert in the loop as we do our work.
Yeah, no, that's a great. I loved your comment there about informing the future state, right? And it kind of reminds me, another good expression that a girl taught me years ago was, when you know better, you do better, right? And if someone hasn't been trained on something, and this is really important to understand, and I keep pointing out that training an AI model is kind of like raising a kid, because you are creating all these embeddings in the child's mind about your behavior, and you have to remember, actions speak louder than words. So how you act is mostly what the kid's going to pick up on. And you mentioned Andrew Ng. I was over in Vietnam a couple of months ago, and the chairman of FPT Software, who was working with Andrew, made this really interesting comment. He said they're focused on graphic models, large graphic models like you were talking about. And he goes, because, yeah, people talk a lot, people write a lot, but you know what people do all day long is they use their eyes and they watch. And if you're awake, you're looking around and watching stuff. And even if you're asleep, you're dreaming and you're visualizing stuff in your dreams, right? So people kind of watch you, and they pull from that. And you want to be careful about how you train these things. Like you want to be careful about how you raise your kids. And Paul, you apparently did a good job. If your kid was worried about cheating by using ChatGPT, that's a good sign. I think you've done well.
Or I did the wrong thing. They don't think about tools, so I don't know. I do want to maybe add just one real quick comment. The notion here around sort of a future state is really important, and I think sharing in venues like this and others, thinking about how we can collectively sort of nudge. There are a lot of policy issues that are surfacing. The EU has its own rules. The US has come up with a presidential mandate. I think the opportunity is this informed dialogue will start to drive that future state.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that when you're in the round, and this is why I love this show, when we do these shows, when you're in the round with other people having live conversation, especially if you're broadcasting, because then people are paying attention, you come up with new ideas and you realize things. That's the aha moment we talk about, and you find new ways to express yourself. And with that, Derek, I'll give you 1 minute and 5 seconds to tease your book, The AI Playbook.
Oh, well, the antidote to the hype is to focus on value. The AI playbook presents a 6-step business practice to successfully usher your machine learning projects through to successful deployment. So instead of just the number crunching part, you actually integrate it, operationalize it. One comment about Paul saying, I love the hype. Here I am saying, I don't like the hype. Paul says, I love the hype. I don't think we disagree about that much. I think we're just using the word hype in different ways. I love the excitement. I think there's a lot to be excited about. A lot of great use cases from UPS and FICO I included in the book. By hype, I mean where it's over expectations, where you're actually excited about something that's not realistic. If you Google AI hype, the second result is my Harvard Business Review article. So I'll plug the article. It's fun.
Wow.
It deconstructs the AI definition. What does it really mean? It's kind of funny when you kind of deconstruct what it means and why that actually leads to what I mean by hype.
That's a great way to end the live show here. Podcast bonus segment coming up next. I did my thesis on deconstruction. You've been listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here on DM Radio, talking to Paul Marca from Ikigai and Eric Siegel from Machine Learning Week. And Paul, you're always creating content. I love the sound of it because you're focused on industry. And if you're focused on industry, you got to go deep. I mean, you really have to understand the forces that are driving this industry. Where are the rough edges, all that kind of fun stuff. What are you working on now?
We have a course that we're developing at Ikigai that features Devavar Shah, our CEO, and also MIT faculty member. And the focus of that is building the foundations course. Really, I would call it the under the hood algorithms and rationale for how we leverage large graphical models to deliver value through the three products that Ikigai offers, which is AI Match, AI Plan, and AI Cast. And so really excited about getting that. It'll be very MOOC-like, and we hope that it will be delivered in the sort of April timeframe. That's sort of the goal. What really excites me about that is that not a lot of people are talking about large graphical models and the potential there to generate algorithms to fill in missing cells in Excel spreadsheets. So really leveraging this AI for tabular data.
Interesting. I remember learning from Andrew Ng when they were talking about these large graphic models. They made a really good point. They did this big alliance with FPT because FPT has manufacturing and they have all these other lines of business. And the point he made is that, look, for text, there's a ton of text that's all over the internet. But in terms of photographs of industrial machines, that is not so common. And so if you partner with someone who is in manufacturing, then you could take pictures of all these nuts and bolts and different things. I mean, it was like, gosh, it was probably 6, 7 years ago. I did a show with a guy who was from either GM or Ford, and he was talking about the future, which then was not too far away and is now here, where, or at least to a certain extent, instead of using this just cumbersome manual for your car, you would just point your phone at the part of the engine and it would go, oh, this is your carburetor, or this is this, or this is that, and this is what you do. I mean, imagine how much time that could save an engineer who's working on a car. First of all, you're already tapping into the computer, so it's already giving you readings on things. And then you go in there and you look at it, okay, this bolt is wrong or this thing is wrong, just from what it sees or what it hears, right? I mean, that to me is the future of industrial AI. Eric Siegel, what do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, when you get that extra data, it doesn't matter whether it's visual or textual or tabular, it's data from which to learn. I mean, we used to call it big data. And that's such a passé term now. But, all along, it turns out that what was big was the excitement, the potential value of the data, not the size of the data. It's always twice as big as it was yesterday. And you're going to run out of adjectives, big, bigger, biggest. But the thing that's valuable about data is it's a recording of experience. It's previous examples from which to learn, and what's learned is a predictive model, and that model can be used to generate new content, such as writing and graphics, and can be used to directly predict things that matter for all your largest scale, most important business operations. The question, though, is how do you operationalize it? So everyone's so enamored with the technology these days, that is the core number crunching part, the rocket science part, the machine learning algorithms. We're a little bit forgetting to focus on its potential proven business value, its deployment, paving the way to that. It's almost like being more excited about the rocket science than the launch of the rocket.
Right. That's a good line. In fact, that's such a good line. I'm going to close on that. Folks, we'll talk to you next time. If you want to be on the show, send me an email, info@dmradio.biz. We are booking all year long. And we're also booking for our other show, Inside Analysis, info@insideanalysis.com. You've been listening to DM Radio.